for coming here this afternoon. My name is Mike Dowd. I'll introduce our folks at DEQ, and then we can go around the room so we can all get to know each other, and then we'll talk about the meeting and go forward from there. I'm Mike Dowd. I'm the director of the Air and Renewable Energy Division of DEQ. I know that I didn't know earlier, Pastor Paul, if you confused me with the director of DEQ, which I am certainly not. He would be.
I was confused because I knew that you were a high-ranking person in Washington.
He was starstruck.
Just
so.
Well, I'm not Mr. Paler. He would be somewhat surprised to find out he's been replaced as director. So, but it does come into play at some point because there are certain things we can do and certain things we can't do in the Air Division. So I'm Mike Dowd, and why don't I start over there with Cheryl?
Yeah, my name is Cheryl Mayo. I'm an air permit writer in the Piedmont Regional Office, and I would say that I helped Pat to write the permit.
I'm Kyle Winter. I'm the Deputy Regional Director in the Piedmont Office and supervise air permitting, compliance, and enforcement.
I'm Rena Callis. I'm with the Communications Office at DEQ.
I'm James Kyle, and I'm the Air Permit Manager at Piedmont Regional Office.
Richard Walker. My family has owned property, particularly where the Atlantic Coast Pipeline wants to have an easement to connect to the Transco, which we're right on the property of. I'm out of Richmond. I also operate a business myself out of Richmond.
I'm Ann Wren. I'm also with DEQ Communications Division.
Now, these two are perhaps the most important folks from DEQ here. They're the two most directly related to the permit, along with Cheryl.
My name is Tamara Thompson, and I am the permit manager of the Air and Renewable Energy section downtown Richmond. And
I'm Pat Corbett. My title is the Air Toxics Coordinator. I work with Cheryl on the air permit.
His title's somewhat deceptive.
Yeah.
Principal permit writer
let's
on
do
this. He
everything.
does deal with toxic, so he's a toxic expert as well. Now, folks from...
Yeah, I'm Dr. Mary Finley Brooke from the University of Richmond. I'm also part of the Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative, and I serve on the Governor's Advisory Commission on Environmental Justice.
Lakshmi?
Waiting. Okay, I'm Dr. Lakshmi Fjord, and I was one of the co-founding community members of Yogaville, which is an interfaith community here in Buckingham, where we move for the clean air and water. And also, I'm affiliated faculty of the University of Virginia Department of Anthropology, where I got my PhD. Otherwise, I'm retired. And I work on all the ethno-historical and the demographic, ethnographic issues of Union Hill.
Swami Dayananda from Satchidananda from Yogaville. I'm one of the monastics. I serve there as one of the Board of Trustee members, and for Yogaville Environmental Solutions as a committee member, and Lourdes Center for All Faith. Thank you.
I'm Pastor Paul Wilson, pastor of Union Hill, Union Road, one church, two locations in the Union Hill community. And I also operate one of the oldest businesses in Virginia, fifth generation. And but I look like I'm spending more time arguing with Dominion about the compressor station. Very much concerned about the quality of the air and water and all the impacts that such a monstrosity that they're proposing for our area. And my job is to speak truth to the situation as it comes from God, as a Christian pastor, and to speak to the social injustices that are being committed in the name of profits.
My name is Chad Oba, and I live in the impacted community of the proposed compressor station. And I've been working as the community organizer with Friends of Buckingham. I'm the chair, president, whatever, for 4 years now, from the very beginning. And I'm very concerned with the quality of our air and water and the impact on all of our cultural resources and our way of life in this neighborhood. And I'd just like to say thank you for finally meeting with us. We've been waiting for 4 years for this to happen. Better late than never, but very happy that you're here now, because it's really important that you hear the concerns of this community. We've actually really been struggling for 4 years now, trying to get answers and trying to know whether we really are going to be protected by, in the way that you look at this and analyze it. So, and I'd like to say also, I have some petitions for you, and I'll just read them. We put this together very quickly. We've only had 3 or 4 days. We've gone door to door. It's difficult to even get, to get all the signatures. We didn't even get to actually some of the closest people along the James River Highway. I'm hoping to collect some later this evening, because they probably will be coming. But it reads, "We, the following citizens residing on Union Hill Road, Shelton Store Road, James River Highway, and Woods Road, and the community of Yogaville, being communities that would be directly impacted by the proposed site of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, Buckingham Compressor Station, ask that the Department of Environmental Quality should immediately complete a quantified risk assessment for the Buckingham Compressor Station prior to permitting, and to work with other state agencies to conduct a health risk assessment and a health impact assessment." And we were able to get, in this short amount of time, 78 signatures. So there's a larger community that is concerned about this, other than this small group. I mean,
Sure.
we'll see later this evening. But I felt it was important to let you know that.
Well, we appreciate that. Either you can give those to me and I can make it part of the record, the comment period is open
Great.
now, or else you can complete it and submit it as one document onto the record, however you want to do it, Chad.
Well, we'll continue to collect them.
I think that'd probably be better, continue to collect them and then submit it as one document to us on the record. Mail it to us or
Great.
scan it or something like that.
Chad, Yogaville alone had 67, so 78
Right.
is just your...
No, that's all together, from
Okay.
Yogaville and from we had about 30. Yeah.
Okay, so that would be 107.
Yeah.
That's about 100.
My name is Jiva Abate. I'm Director of Yogaville Environmental Solutions, which was formed at the same time with the same groups of people as Friends of Buckingham. So to represent Yogaville's interests formally, we formed a small group to stand against the pipeline and to fulfill our sustainable principles. So I'm also a member of the Board of Trustees and very happy that you're here. Thank you.
Glad you're here.
I'm Irene Ellis Leach, and I grew up at the intersection of 24 and 60 at Mount Rush Farm, where my family has been raising registered Angus cattle. We've had a business there for 116 years. And the pipeline will bisect us for over a mile, and obviously air is very, very important for our farming operation.
And this happened to be one of those days. And I have to say already that the pipeline has affected us in that it has caused him to have more confusion about where he is and about what's going on in our home, in our neighborhood. I try to explain that at this time it's just not working, and other things are happening. So it's very distressing personally that I'm dealing with his decline and dealing with this situation, this ACP coming into the neighborhood. It makes it difficult. I'm taking 2 strikes at one time.
Can I follow up? So when we went past the easement, we said this is Marie's house.
Right,
So
right.
that was right where you saw the markings and the trees felled.
Okay.
That's right where
Trees
she lives,
over
very
Union
close to
Hill
the
Road.
church. Yeah,
On Union Hill
just
Road,
adjacent.
yes,
When I
yes.
talked about 6 a.m. starting construction
Yes.
unnecessarily, yeah.
Well, I do want to thank you all for coming. We just had a few of my folks, Pat and Tamara and I, got a very nice tour of the area with Lakshmi and several others in the room, and it was an eye-opener, and I'll tell you, coming away from it, I had very mixed feelings, because when I heard the story, and comparing it to what we do here in the Air Division at DEQ, I'm going to tell you folks some things you don't want to hear today. I'm going to tell you some things that I think are very good. First, the bad news. We just regulate air. And Chad, when you mentioned, that you're glad we're finally here. This is actually the perfect point in the process for an air permit. So we're not early, we're not late. I know the pipeline itself has been going on for a long time, and it's been dealt with by a lot of folks at DEQ who don't deal with air, and frankly, we here in the Air Division don't deal with water, we don't deal with the 401 certifications, or things like that. So to the extent that you have concerns or comments on those things, we'll be glad to hear them, but at the end of the day, they're not part of the permit process. For instance, we can't deal with things like noise. We can't deal with things like light. We can't deal with the color, whatever color it is. We don't deal with aesthetics. We don't deal with land use issues in the Air Division, or really at DEQ. That's in the purview, under the jurisdiction of the County Board of Supervisors. For better or worse, the county approved it I think it was back in January, at a very contentious meeting. Once we got certification that the county had approved it, that's one of the things we require for an air permit. We can't issue a permit or start processing a permit until the local jurisdiction has approved it. So the good news is we do regulate air. And one thing, I'd like to keep this conversation informal. I'm going to have a big meeting tonight where everyone can talk. Somebody had back during, I believe it was the Advisory Council on Environmental Justice, had mentioned maybe, talking to folks in the community, a small group, and, it wasn't my intention to be at all exclusive or anything like that, but I thought it might be a good idea if folks wanted to meet in a smaller group, to have more of a discussion than just a question and answer period. So, here we are, and I'd like to keep this as informal as possible. I'm going to sit down in a minute. I just have to stretch my legs after being in the van. A couple of things I want to get across, and we can have a spirited discussion on this if you'd like, but in order to issue an air permit, the applicant, in this case Dominion, has to prove to us two very important things. First of all, they have to demonstrate that the compressor station or any facility has to have the best available control technology to control pollutants. And we believe that this permit does have that. We believe it's the most stringently regulated compressor station in the country. And Pat and Tamara and I, we can discuss that and go into why that's the case. The second thing is we can't permit anything outside, nitrogen oxide, particulate matter, in particular particulate matter, which is one of the more dangerous pollutants, and I know there's been a great concern about we call it PM. There are two types of it. PM10, which is 10 microns across, very small, but even smaller stuff still is PM2.5. Those are regulated under our permit. And emissions are modeled, and the modeling has to show that emissions, under worst case scenarios, and under short-term scenarios, I know that was a question too, we don't just look at it over an hour, or over 24 hours, we look at it in terms of 1 hour time frames as well, do not exceed health-based standards. We also look at air toxics. And air toxic is a bit more confusing. There's no real federal standard. I'll get back to certain pollutants like sulfur dioxide, particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, lead, carbon monoxide. Those are regulated by federal standards set by the Environmental Protection Agency, pursuant to very complex, they're called National Ambient Air Quality Standards proceedings. It's set by EPA with input from nationally recognized environmental health experts. And EPA reviews those every 5 years. And sometimes it sets tighter standards, sometimes it doesn't. But the standards are supposed to be set on the basis of evolving science, evolving health science. For those pollutants. With toxics, it's a little more confusing. There is a federal program. The federal program really, and it's confusing, really, it applies to this, but it's sort of too small. But we look at it in terms of we have a state air toxics program, And we've analyzed the pollutants, and especially the pollutants that are emitted of most concern, formaldehyde and hexane, model well below what we call our significant ambient air concentrations.
Based on annual numbers.
No,
an hourly.
Well,
There's a 1 hour standard and an annual standard.
So, and maybe this is
And
a
how many
good...
tons is that annually?
What?
The formaldehyde and the hexane?
It can't exceed the 1 hour standard.
Yeah, but what is the annual tonnage of each of those?
I'm not sure what your question
What is
is.
it
Are you
that
asking what the
causes?
annual tons per year emissions are?
Because it's just interesting to, when you say, you know, formaldehyde and hexane isn't too much.
It's, off the top of my head, you know, forgive me if I'm off a little bit, it's about 4 tons a year
As an
for
annual.
formaldehyde, and the hexane is less than 1. The formaldehyde was modeled well below the health-based standard, the significant ambient air concentration for the annual and for the 1 hour.
Tons.
Actually, the
yes.
1 hour is not in tons, it's in.
Yeah, the 1
It's
hour.
per hour annual, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, the 1 hour is actually in pounds per hour and a concentration based.
What's the exposure model? 100 people within a mile?
It's a concentration, so, you know, without getting too crazy, you know, health impacts are based on dose response. The amount of impact that a person might feel is dependent on the concentration, right? You know, carbon monoxide isn't that big a deal, but if that's the only thing you were breathing, you'd die. Right. So dose response is what it's called, and so we're modeling a concentration that's actually in the ambient air. And we compare that to the threshold concentration. It's the units are in micrograms per cubic meter.
I see. But it's real, it's modeling.
Yes.
Not real-time testing with people.
No, it's based on health data and science, but the standard itself, you compare where your emissions are with respect to the standard based on modeling.
And when you say ambient air, you say that's of places where this is actually being tested, because there's obviously no air testing of that caliber in Buckingham, or it's actually based on the ambient here? Because I saw a lot of estimates.
Ambient
from
air is
other
a
places.
term that means outside of the fence line. So for the compressor station, you know, or any plant fence to delineate their property, and anything outside of that fence is ambient air. So it's more of a term than it is something that you can.
Is there testing set up on that line?
No. What we do is we model, right, the emission rate after controls, which is, you know, we can go into all that. Kind of harder to jump around a little bit, but I'll do my best. We model the emission rate after controls, and then we issue a permit that reflects that rate that we modeled.
But you modeled it using data from here, or you modeled it using where you have?
Data from here.
Okay. And so you have those monitors set up?
Oh,
Or
you're trying
comparing
to compare, okay, you're thinking more about the NACS approach?
Well, yeah, if you think about monitoring, you know, how are we gonna monitor?
So the way
and
that.
I'm also thinking, like, how are you estimating that? Because I know the air monitoring stations are often set up in, you know, Richmond or Hopewell or Roanoke, or they're not here.
No, it's based on modeling the emissions from the facility itself. It's not based on really an analysis of background data. If that's what there are no background.
So you don't
The
consider what's
regulation
there
is set up.
already? Do you consider what's there already?
The regulation looks at what the source's impact is. That's how that regulation is set up.
Now, when you do the modeling, it takes into consideration 5 years' worth of weather. So you try to come up with the worst case scenario that is, you know, worst case thing is what we base on. So everything we anticipate will be much lower than what the numbers actually are in the permit. The permit is reflective of a worst case scenario.
The permit reflects like a operation if it were 0 degrees Fahrenheit the whole year long.
Which of course
And
is
so
never
we
gonna happen.
select the absolute worst case so that we understand that, you know, we're going to be better than this, and therefore we're confident that there's not going to be an impact over the regulation.
So I have 2 questions, but the first is, when you talk about environmental health science, I just want to understand the studies that you look at, because this, you know, look at these studies. I'm a medical anthropologist. I'm used to reading the journal issues and the articles. And, you know, the Physicians for Social Responsibility and Neuroconcerned Scientists just put together a 1,300 study of existing compressor stations, not modeling, not sort of abstractions, strong health impacts.
You know, that's an important.
And we had existing health.
Let me get into that,
conditions.
because
Yeah,
you're
help me
asking,
understand
and it gets into something, you know, what we do and what we don't do. We are not health scientists at DEQ. What we do is regulate to existing health standards established by others, basically. And, you know, with respect to the EPA standards, what's called National Ambient Air Quality Standards, those are established by EPA, reviewed every 5 years, and due to a very complex procedure that has to be, you know, numerous draft reports and staff reports and draft reports, and it all goes to something called CASAC, which is the Clean Air Science Advisory Committee, which is a panel of basically, you know, nationally recognized environmental health scientists, air pollution scientists. And so EPA doesn't just decide these standards by themselves, although EPA has the final say on them. They're basically established by this CASAC. CASAC establishes a range, and if EPA goes outside the range that these independent health experts have established as what a safe limit is, and when I say a safe limit, the Clean Air Act requires these standards to be set at a level to protect public health with an adequate margin of safety. And they are meant to protect, it says in the Act, they're meant to protect vulnerable populations. What I mean by that is elderly and children. And, you know, we don't do the studies. And every time EPA sets one of these NACs, they're sued on both sides. Everyone sues on both sides. Environmental groups say they're not tough enough. Industry sources say they're too tough. Courts have just about always affirmed EPA's findings on the NACs. In fact, I'm trying to think, you know, if EPA has ever been overturned on a NACs fine. I'm sure it has at some point. So that's how so there is always debate over what the NACs means, how protective it is. But that's a debate that goes on in Washington with respect to those pollutants, especially PM might be the one of most concern here.
So can I finish the second part of the question? So I had
Sure.
two parts. Well, yeah, so there are these lists of toxins
And the toxins are handled somewhat differently.
Yeah, and then there's
And I'll
fine
take that.
particulate matter, and we're going to ask you more about that
Sure.
because we feel like that's not really covered in this as well as we would like. But anyway, that's
Okay, well,
I'm not going to bring that
that's
up
what
now. The point is,
That's fair. That's fair
I don't
game.
want to go herring off into.
But that's fair game. That's exactly what we're here to
Yes.
listen to. If you don't think the PM standard is right in the permit, that's exactly the germane type of question we would like and what we'd like to see comments on.
Yes, and we will
Okay,
give them to
right.
you. We have that comment. So I guess my concern is, and this is always an issue as a scientist myself, right? I peer review journal articles. There's 3 of us in here who do this. The problem that we've seen is when you talk about independent science, we're troubled because of the reason why there's such a difference between what the EPA is now using as standards and what other independent scientists that receive no funding. And for example, FERC's health risk assessment is honestly laughable because it doesn't have an author, it doesn't, you know, they took tests from Dominion's own findings. So we can talk about how that doesn't stand up. So you see that as people imagining that we are going to be living with the people we meet in Pennsylvania who already have smaller compressor stations, who have cancers, who have respiratory issues and asthma, they have gas coming out of their water supply, it's lighting up. They're not kidding, you know, we've gone to them, you've seen them. You can understand why then who creates the science is actually at the heart of all sort of academic and, you know, expert discussions now, right?
You won't get any pushback from us
I'm
on that
sure
at
not,
all.
yeah.
You know, and you're not going to like this answer. It's not what we do. We
No,
can't.
understood.
We can't set the standards. In fact, the thinking has always been that these standards really require a national approach because EPA, you know, air doesn't. But respect state boundaries.
Exactly. Equal opportunity.
Right.
Mike, you got a question?
So
I know Gary's been
Dr.
screaming here, I'm
Fjord's
sorry.
expertise is in medical anthropology, mine is in environmental justice. And so the two pieces of environmental justice that these look at each site and each contaminant is not comprehensive, as we know. So you're not always being able to include all of the different exposures. And so to be able to really model that in a comprehensive way that does air, you're saying we can only do air. Well, we get that, but these
Right,
people
right.
aren't just living the air.
No,
In which
I
case we
understand
need
that.
air, we
I
need
get
water,
that.
we need the different types of air emissions. We know, formaldehyde with hexane, what's that? What are the other hazardous air pollutions? What are the volatile organic compounds with the SOx, with the NOx? You put that all together. Comprehensive is one. Number two is pre-existing conditions. So maybe it's safe to expose a healthy person, but I'm not sure Marie's husband is going to be able to deal with those exposures, or the number of elderly people, or the number of young children that live within that radius. So to tell us that it's totally safe based on these national numbers, when you know what the pre-existing conditions, and we have a long list of what those are, and we know that there are people here that are not very healthy in some instances, that's where it gets really difficult to hear, like, it's totally safe. And you all said, well, we're not health experts, but you're coming and saying it's at the levels that's safe, and it's really concerning people when you know that those levels don't address comprehensive, and they're not taking necessarily into consideration all of those pre-existing conditions. And that's why it's a hard, I get that you all have to put a box around it, but these people don't have a box around their lives.
Mary, I understand that concern entirely, and it's at the heart of the setting of these standards, both whether it's for toxics or whether it's for the criteria pollutants. I hear that, and is the PM 2.5 standard protective of human health? Okay, what does that mean? And I get this. Where are your vulnerable communities? At what level of safety is it set? And I understand a lot of these health studies are not done on children. They're not done on elderly people. They generally don't break them down by race. They're often done in college communities where you get a pretty homogeneous. I understand how that's done. And about all I can say to that is, at the moment, this is the best work that has come out of our health scientists at EPA. And under the Clean Air Act, those are the standards we follow. And I think that what you'll see in the modeling that we've done, and we can talk about the modeling, at some point, is that, they're modeling in pretty far under the NACs. And I want to be careful how you can look at some are close, some are closer than others. Some are closer than others, but none of them is right against a number. Correct. None of them is like pushing, none of them is like if the limit's 50, none of them are 48.9 or 49.8 or
correct.
Like that. Some have a bigger margin of, a bigger headroom than others. That's true. That's just the way that health standards are set in the United States. We could not, as a practical matter, for every single air permit we do the type of analysis you're talking about.
Yeah,
it
will happen.
It might even happen in our lifetime.
Can we also say that that what level, when this permit and I'm going to ask all the people in the permitting, we're just curious, why is there not a notion that it really matters how many people it is and what their ages are and whether majority African American? Because in NEPA, right, it states very specifically that we're not supposed to put new toxic emitting facilities in these places where there are a lot more people and there are majority African American or Native American, in this case African American, that should be like the sine qua non before we talk about modeling and all of this, because then we're talking about the actual people, their existing conditions. And I undertook, as I told you, I oversaw a household study. So we have even preliminary information about that we've been trying to get to, you and everybody else in DEQ, not just this week and not just with the air permit, with the first draft of the air permit, to say, just wait a minute, do we want to rethink this? Because this is actually against NEPA standards that's supposed to have been at the beginning, before site location is chosen. Why wasn't Dominion called out on that? Why wasn't that a part of the decision making?
Well, I'm not sure I can fully answer your
Yeah,
question, because
sorry.
we were involved in the NEPA process. My understanding of the NEPA process is that it's not a regulatory process. It's supposed to bring out the applicant and the government, in this case, the FERC, are supposed to, assess all environmental impacts and just say, this is what the environmental impacts are. A NEPA statement doesn't say that, the impact is such and such, therefore the project is banned. All the NEPA process does is point out what the impacts are. And that's where a lot of litigation is, because a lot of NEPA studies don't go that far. And courts say, no, you didn't assess this or you didn't assess that. What you're raising, as I said before, gets to the heart of how the health standards are set in the first place. What science goes into setting the PM10 or PM2.5 standard. And
I'm not sure though,
Well-
right? Because in the FEIS for the ACP, right? We all use these letters.
I know, which I have not read, by the way.
Well, I have.
I'm sure you have.
Most words of it. I have.
So-
And been trying to.
So I will take your word for what's ever in it.
I really am not going to make this up.
No, I'm not.
They said very
relying on you.
distinctly that there's huge reasons not to locate compressor station, or this compressor station, in a predominantly minority community or a predominantly impoverished community, both of which this is. And they gave actual paragraph after paragraph about the health impacts of compressor stations, which to me overrides what you're talking about of these national standards. So they're saying this would be a terrible thing if there were actually a lot of people there and they actually ended up being a majority African American, and then proceeded to say, according to the census tract data for the average of Buckingham, there's 29.6 people there. Now, that's what I'm asking, right?
And my answer to that is, here again, you might not like this, but when we look at it, we don't look at it in terms of population at all.
Yeah,
I was going to say, we look at it in terms of what the maximum model concentration of a pollutant is anywhere, whether it's on the side of a mountain. I mean, we've had debates with people about whether, we have a NAAQS violation up on the side of a mountain in the Shenandoah where nobody lives within, and people say there's no one there. Doesn't matter. We can't permit it. If there's any place where anyone in the public has access to, and the model number exceeds the NAAQS, we can't permit that facility unless they take a pollution control measure that reduces it, regardless of whether 0 people live there or whether 1 million people live there.
Can I just say that's shifting, and one of the things that's really interesting with the EPA, so they use something called an environmental justice screen, and I don't know if you've used any of those tools, but they very much look at population. So first of all, they use race and income, but they always really do care about population, and I've been kind of critical of it because sometimes I don't think that that's fair to prioritize just based on the numbers of people who live there.
But they don't set the NAAQS on that.
I know, but I'm just saying that there is a shifting in the recognition that you do need to look at how many people are impacted. So I get that your office doesn't, but again, this whole thing isn't just about one air permit. It's, it really does need to have a broader conversation about how you could look at this within an environmental justice lens. If you can recognize that you have both race and income as factors, it really brings it into a different conversation that hasn't happened, but I think is going to have to happen in this case.
Well, I'll tell you generally that when I talk to people, when I sit in conferences that deal with the future of the NAAQS or the future of health-based standards, that is one of the big debates. I think, well, gee, we should move away from how the NAAQS are set now to more an exposure-based model. Maybe if a standard could be higher where nobody lives. I'm not sure you would really like that too much because in a rural community, you don't want a standard just based on number of people exposed.
Right, and that's why I'm saying I've had a problem with some of those rudimentary.
So based on your exposure, your evidence, the circumference that you guys wrote today, either going east, north, south, or west, that this will not affect any of those properties or peoples that are in those densities between here and where the compressor station could conceivably be.
Well,
the air quality wouldn't be.
Let me sort of rephrase that. I will say that there is no place in that area we saw today that has modeled for an exceedance of the national ambient air quality standards or for the significant ambient air concentration level for the toxics. Now, you know, do you want, can I guarantee it's absolutely safe? You know, according to the EPA, those are the standards that they've set that we live by, that the nation as a whole lives by.
Are you allowed to do anything at all with methane?
Well,
You're not in this case, however.
Let's talk about that. Let's have a conversation. You regulate volatile organic compounds.
It's not a VOC.
It's not a VOC.
It's
It's either is or it isn't.
I'm sorry, I nodded my head also.
Yes, you
apologize.
did. It's not a
It's
VOC,
excluded.
but that's where the methane, it's
Yeah.
the same. When you were controlling VOCs, you control methane by default.
Yeah.
So co-pollutant, methane has
It's a
co-pollutants.
co-pollutant,
yeah.
Okay, so
And
co-pollutants.
we can talk about this permit on methane. I think it's perhaps the permit's strongest point. We can talk about NOx. NOx is a very strong permit too, but on methane, I'll give you some of the history on this. And I know that there's been stuff written that we've had a lot of back and forth with Dominion in this whole process. Yeah, we have a lot of back and forth during the permit process with just about every applicant. Because 9 times out of 10, the first application we get stinks from an applicant. It just about always stinks. They leave out tons of information. And we go back to them and say, this application, and we did this with Dominion a couple of times, this application is insufficient because of X, Y, and Z. And it's not that we're trying to coach them, it's not that we're trying to make it work for them. We want to make it better. And one thing that they did not mention in their first application was controlling methane. Well, we started a discussion with them. And the first thing we came up with, because basically state-of-the-art to control methane is a flare.
It's a what?
A flare.
Flare.
He's a burner.
It's like a
Burns it
candle.
up. Yeah, it's a candle.
Yeah.
It's a big candle, and you know, we had a lot of discussion with Dominion on that. We had a lot of internal discussion because a flare has problems for you guys, for the community. It destroys methane, it destroys toxics, but it's loud. It's a bright light. It's like a candle that would go off in the night. Well, Dominion said, you know, we really don't want to put on a flare. We hate a flare. What if we come in and say, we got to put on a flare? The community will hate it. It controls methane. You know, well, if the community doesn't want it, they can tell us that. Well, what if we propose something better? And I said, fine, if you can show us something that controls methane better than a flare, show it to us. And you know what they did? They came up with something called a vent gas reduction system. A flare is state-of-the-art. This sort of goes beyond it. I'll tell you what it does for methane. From an uncontrolled standpoint, if this compressor station did not control methane at all, there would be about 150,000, I'm rounding up a little, 155,000 tons of methane emitted per year. With this vent gas reduction system, it's down to 150. Well, 150 may still sound like a lot, but it's nothing compared to 150,000. So we're very happy with the vent gas reduction system. It is going to be monitored out the wazoo. I don't know a better way to put it, but it's a relatively novel technology.
Technical term.
Yeah, technical term. A relatively novel technology. It is going to be monitored constantly. You will see in Pat's presentation tonight, do you have the FLIR picture or the?
I have a link to it. I didn't know if we were going to have.
We don't have to do it now.
I got to check out
but
whether
there's
we're going to
there's some pretty interesting technology out there, that these cameras out there that allow you to see methane emissions.
Yeah.
And Dominion's going to be required on a periodic basis.
Quarterly?
Quarterly at least, but they have to do daily inspections, but quarterly they have to take one of these FLIR cameras out and see where the methane's leaking, if it's leaking.
So I can't get on the internet, but I actually did have a methane expert look at this, and they had questions about that vent gas that they said it would be good if, and I'd like to send those to you, but I can't get on the internet to pull them off, so I'd like to look at what they are and send them to you.
Mary, send them in your comments.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's why we have a public comment period, is because, you know, we do a lot of review, but if there's something that you guys feel would make it better, or some piece of information that you think we didn't find or didn't see,
technology.
that's what we
Yes,
have.
It is in use.
Yes, it's not so novel it hasn't been
And
used.
it's being measured where it's being used, so you know that
We're requiring
Not just
testing.
modeling,
Well,
but
so,
you-
no, we're
live
requiring them to show us
Yes.
on an ongoing basis that it's not leaking, that it's
Yeah.
working correctly.
I think we know enough, or believe we know enough, that we're pretty sure it's gonna operate
Yeah.
pretty well. But here again, it's not, novel, innovative maybe is the phrase. We will be monitoring it carefully to make sure it performs
And
as
if it
advertised.
doesn't, what's
Well,
the
they're gonna fix
consequence?
it.
They'll have to fix it.
They'll have to
You
fix
shut
it.
it down
Yeah.
and then fix it?
Modeled
Or let
on
them
the
keep-
same size and amount as this
I
compressor
don't know.
station?
They're subjected to a higher level of control, although here, I can't say, we've put it to about
We
the highest
actually
level
put
of
it
control
through
we
the
can.
PSD process pretty
But-
much, yeah.
But if indeed they do that, even though the controls are really best available control technology we have here, if they do that within 5 years, they can't, first of all, they can't do it within 5 years. It would have to be after that because there's something called circumvention. You can't take a project that should be a major source, split it into 2 minor sources, and then build it one after another. There's a presumption period that if it's done within 5 years, that it would be a major PSD permit. There's something called circumvention. They're subject to enforcement action. 5 years is just a presumption. If indeed we thought it was a circumvention issue at some point beyond 5 years, we have that authority too. Something that you're talking about would concern us, I think, quite a bit. Because, Dominion has come into us saying, this is a small permit. This is a minor permit. So we don't have to do all this stuff. Well, it turned out they wound up doing about 99% of what you do under a major source permit anyways. But if they came in trying to double the size of it in the next few years, I think that would be something we would look upon.
Can you guarantee that it couldn't happen?
Well,
Because this is a
I can't
subterfuge.
guarantee anything.
See, this is what they said. We said,
Yeah.
so you're telling us this is going to be safe. They met in the church.
Right.
Can you promise you're not going to repeat what you did at Dominion? I mean, at
Loudon.
Leesburg. They said, no, we can't promise that, and we won't. So now we've got people supposedly giving us this, which could later become this.
They
We're supposed to
can't-
trust
Listen,
the people who can't promise us, guarantee us.
when this project first started,
I'm sorry, can I?
let me just
He's-
finish.
Oh, okay.
When the project first started out at 33,000 horsepower. Now it's at right at 55,000. They told us point blank that it would not increase. When things shifted, it had to increase. Okay. That really grabbed us. It almost doubled. Now, you're talking all of this technical stuff. I understand some of it, okay, but I can't. I'm not astute enough to get into those numbers. So it's really, I'm almost like Chad, it's over my head, okay. But this is the question that I want to ask you, okay. Would it be all right for your grandmother, your pregnant daughter, your children, to live in a community where this type of compressor station is proposed?
Well,
I've
thought about this question.
Right, now, I know you can't.
No, I'll answer it.
Right,
I'll
but I know
answer it.
I mean, I know
I'll be glad to
your
answer.
personal feelings can't come into it. You understand the numbers better than, because this is your bailiwick. But
I would be glad to answer that
right, but would you live here? Would you live in the community? Would you feel safe? Watch this.
Okay.
Down the road after 5-10 years of exposure to the stuff, okay, you're going to be breathing the air, your farm animals, your pets, okay. How would you feel?
Let me
Okay.
let me answer the question. I want to be careful because I know this is being taped.
Yes.
Would I want to live next to a
Would you?
next to a compressor station? The answer is probably no, because I would not want the noise. I would not want the light. I would not want to live next to what it looks like. I understand that. I would not be afraid to live near it because of the air emissions. That I can say. I'll tell you, I live in the city now. I live in Chaco Bottom in Richmond. It's an urban environment. It's getting cleaner. When you compare what the compressor station is to diesel buses passing your house, Yeah, I would
But we
not live there because of health effects, because of health concerns. I mean, that I can tell you, that would not stop me from living there. On the other hand, I wouldn't like the noise, I wouldn't like the light. I wouldn't necessarily like what it looks like. I understand not wanting to live next to one. But to me, the health effect from the air pollution would not be a reason not to live there. Is that a fair answer?
Is that basically all of you?
Yeah.
Yes.
What about the other risks, though? Because
Well, like
air
what?
pollution is one risk. Is that where you were
Right,
going?
I'm just
Because I
talking.
think people
Right,
would
right.
discuss
But they can only deal with the air, so they can only speak to the air.
I know, but then
But
it's
with that
really
comes
unfortunate
everything.
that there's really not a place to talk about evacuation in the way that needs to be talked about, first responders in the way that they need to be talked about. I mean, maybe that daily emissions don't bother you, but with living right next, and I know in the permit, if there's a leak, they're allowed to wait for the time that they can fix it, if there's gonna be more all
And
of
they don't
those
even have to
things.
tell the county for 2
Mary, I could
weeks.
tell you, let me tell you something. Maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I would have said, these things never blow up. And then all of a sudden I do. I start seeing some.
If you look for it, you're gonna see
Yeah.
I do
track
see it. I
record.
do see it.
Once it's in
I
your
do.
neighborhood,
I
people
I
send
see
you
it.
these things.
And I'm
I
not sure
see
they're
it.
being built
I
the
can't
same way.
I can't speak to that.
And there's going to be a lot more going through those.
There's
You know,
40
would I
major
be
accidents
concerned
a
about
year,
it? Maybe.
according to Vince. So
Yeah,
I'd be
exactly.
concerned
It's
about it.
recorded per
fatalities,
year from the
injuries,
industry,
property,
from the state.
burning.
I mean,
What-
Well, and here's the other thing, Appomattox, which was just a single turbine compressor station on the Transco, that blew up. And that's very close. I mean, people were living there, remember it, people, houses were destroyed. It's very close by.
I live
And
probably
so it's
10
not an abstraction
Yeah. No, I
that
mean,
a five
I'm not
times
saying it is,
bigger
yeah.
one would
Yeah.
be a problem.
My home is perhaps 15
Yeah, you're-
miles or 10,
Oh.
I don't know, between 20 and 15, well, no,
I thought you were-
I'm a little over a mile
Wait,
from the
apologies.
proposed site.
Right.
We're talking about the Appomattox
Oh,
explosion.
okay.
The morning that blew, my house shook, and I heard it. I have a Transco line, a lateral line directly across the road from me that wasn't marked when I bought that property, by the way. And now Transco and intersecting pipelines of the ACP and the compressor station, we're toast for miles around.
I can't speak to that, Chad.
I know you can,
yeah,
but like Mary said.
I've seen the pictures too.
There's a bigger picture. Nobody speaks to that. Nobody, our concerns just sort of evaporate.
That's not our issue, that's not our issue,
Yeah.
that's not
We
our
haven't
issue,
found
that's not our
anybody
issue,
And the
nobody
water
wants to hear
board
their issues.
doesn't want to hear. Who gets to hear? Who
Where?
is
What is the fire
overseeing?
marshal? No, seriously, what is a fire marshal?
I have another question about the air.
They're volunteer.
I have another
They don't have
question.
fire marshal?
I have another question about the air quality.
It's gonna be with the county supervisor.
Another question. So, if, when, or the probability or whatever, if something happens and there are problems, okay? I feel that Dominion is already factoring in how much fines that they're gonna get.
Yeah.
That's part of business.
Oh, yeah.
Expendable.
Right,
Pass
okay.
on.
We're sacrificial.
Okay, well, you guys gonna say, for the air quality permit, you've done this, you've broken this rule, then watch this. Okay. We're gonna give you a big fine. That's gonna be all in the papers, and everybody's gonna say, you guys are on your job. It's gonna
Goes to
be,
the state,
watch
not to
this.
the
It goes to the state,
It's gonna
exactly.
be, can I say a rigorous fine? They love that word, rigorous. Okay,
I should have said something else.
But it's gonna be a big fine, but, okay,
Let me try to address that, Reverend. No, that's an important question. I used to be the enforcement director for DEQ, so I know a little bit about enforcement. Our primary concern in the enforcement division and in compliance division is to bring the facility into compliance as quickly as possible. So what that means is we don't worry about money up front. That's the least of our concerns immediately. The first thing is to get them into compliance. So if we ever heard, as soon as we hear that there would be an issue of compliance, excess emissions, a leak, or
I'm sorry.
that's okay. But I'm just trying to say that the last thing we think about is the money. The first thing we think about is getting that facility into compliance. plugging the leak, getting the equipment fixed, making sure their emissions are in compliance. That's the first thing we do.
Is that how you responded in Loudon?
I don't know.
When Loudon had 3 blowdowns in a month, and one of them was a test one with odorant, and was experienced as far as 10 miles out, was that
I don't know if, I'm not familiar with that situation, I'm not sure it was a violation.
On that one.
I mean, there were 100
Well,
calls to the...
I can tell you this.
People
that
were sick. And we're not gonna have odorant.
No.
So we're really.
Well, I
worried.
understand, and in fact, I looked at that, I understand that the pipeline gas, the gas in pipelines generally does not have the mercaptan in it.
Right, the transmission ones
Right,
don't.
right.
And so, we
So-
realize that we can't taste it, we can't
won't
smell
know.
it, we can't see it, we
There-
can't. And so we could be killed
We could be dying.
and not know it.
DEQ, and let me try to answer your
Sure,
question.
sure.
And I think there's something, I don't know if a guarantee is the word or whatever, but DEQ is very decentralized. We have regional offices and that deal with most enforcement and permitting questions. This is a very special permit, so central office is working with our regional, colleagues in getting this permit together. I don't know what happened in Loudoun County. I can tell you this, that with the, what am I gonna say, the notoriety of this compressor station, it will be on my radar scope and the radar scope of folks in central office all the time. It will not escape notice if there's an issue with respect to compliance. I mean, I can tell you that personally, as long as I'm here, it'll be on my radar scope. Central office will be highly involved in compliance issues, if any compliance issues arise, if permitting issues arise, like what you mentioned about, are they going to try to double the size of of the facility? That will be something that'll be constantly on our
What if they
radar
double
scope.
the blowdowns? Let's say...
Yeah, well, that's something that this
I mean, they've
permit
told
is
us
regulating.
different things. They've told us 1 blowdown a year, then they told us 5.
Once 5
oh,
years.
Told us
Okay.
every 5 years.
That's part of that back and forth that we were talking
Yeah.
about earlier.
Yeah.
That one, so that one's relatively straightforward. They came in with 100 startups and shutdowns for each turbine. That was their initial
Per year?
application. Per year.
Okay.
So which is any 12 months.
Yeah.
They also had 1 facility-wide test, right? And in the back and forth, what we were talking about, we went to the flare to control those events. They came back and said, well, we're going to put on this vent gas reduction system for the turbines. So that takes 100 blowdowns per turbine and drives it to close to 0. It can't be 0 like I was saying, because they have to do maintenance occasionally. So they said we only need 10 per 12-month period. So now it goes from 100 to 10 venting events for the turbines, blowdowns for the turbines. And then the system-wide, the facility-wide blowdown actually is now capped. They were originally saying we're going to do one once per year, but it won't only be once every 5 years. And so through the process, pushing the flare, trying to make them control to better and better levels, they came and said, and this is actually a standard practice too, it's called capping, where you basically block off the ability to vent that gas, and you do your required, PIMSA is performance of pipeline and hazardous materials.
We know them.
I figured, but I didn't want to blow by
But we
anybody.
also know
We got all
enough
this.
people to do the job.
Right, but all this is in the permit. So they're required to install a valve. They're required to verify that it's closed before they do their test. And then they're required to verify that the emergency valve is closed before they open up the cap, the block valve. So all these things are in the permit, so they can't just go, I want to do more. That's the thing where you were talking about where they want to expand the plan.
Well, what if
Mike
they
was
do
getting
it?
at.
What if they just
Well,
do
then
it?
they would be in violation.
Then you find them?
And then we would
Find them.
we would come out.
And just, just as a side note, as far as fines are concerned, that money does not come to DEQ.
Oh,
Yes.
no, no,
A lot of people think
It
that
doesn't
it does not come to
Oh,
us.
we know the
It
deal.
goes to the Environmental Relief Emergency
Let
Fund.
me, and maybe now's a time to mention something called Executive Order 6. The governor has asked DEQ to sort of look from top to bottom at our regulatory programs, not just air, but water and land as well. In particular, he's asked us to look at our enforcement programs. So I think you will see some initiatives to, let's just say, increase those fines as we go forward. I don't know how that's all going to end. We haven't heard from the governor. It's still in the formative stages. But I suspect you will see some more urgency brought to some of our enforcement programs as we go forward. And some of that, honestly, has probably been brought on by what's going on in other media with respect to the pipeline. I mean, obviously, that's informing a lot of how DEQ management is looking at things these days.
Now, Mike, when we toured the Loudoun County compressor station, they pointed out all their sensors, which incredible electronics capability. So now these sensors, do they also automatically trigger a blowdown if it's an emergency and they need to? Are there?
I'm gonna guess that you're talking about explosions, LEL,
Well,
what's it called, lower explosive limit.
They have all sorts of gas sensors, heat sensors, electronic sensors for potential fires. So they were very proud. They said, oh, we have hundreds of incidents, of which they were bragging. I said, boy, you've got great sensors. They said, oh yeah, we have hundreds of incidents, and sensors take care of a lot of them. So they take care of a lot. So here's the thing.
But see, we'd rather they go in and tell us. I mean, our big concern is hiding the information.
Yeah, they're not
transparency. Right. And that's where, I mean, for at least from my perspective, I would say our perspective, but I mean, the permit requires them to keep all these records, and when you get into them just saying we're not going to keep records, that's an entirely different mode of operation that I don't experience with people.
The Fox keeping record of the hen house.
Well, I mean, you're talking about criminal. You're talking about criminal activities is what you're talking about when people do that. When people willingly and knowingly avoid doing something.
It's only criminal if it's discovered.
And if an inspector shows up at the site,
I understand what you're saying.
unannounced, the first thing you'll say is, let me see your records.
Yeah.
That's the first thing they look at, let me see your records.
How much do we have, how much enforcement inspectors coming around are available in Virginia?
That's not my.
I wish we had more enforcement and inspectors. I wish we did. The governor's going to try to get us more as we go forward under EO6. I can tell you this, that with respect to the rest of the pipeline, this compressor station will get a high degree of attention.
So fine money should go over to you to provide force.
It'll get a high degree of attention. I don't, this is something that's not going to be, if the pipeline gets built, when it gets built, the compliance issues. I mean, if you follow what's going on in the pipe, where the MVP is building and all that, with all the compliance issues. Okay.
See, that
that is, and in fact, this evening, he couldn't be here today, a gentleman named Jerome Brooks, who used to be head of air compliance, is now head of water compliance. He's actually joining us this evening because he's also our EJ coordinator. So, if you run into him in the hallway, you can ask him about the enforcement measures that we're undertaking, and it's very different. When it rains, guys, and those are very difficult enforcement actions. With respect to air, it's a relatively easier thing than when something rains and you get a lot of mud. I'll say that.
We can't see it.
We
can't see it.
And
we can see the mud. I'm telling you.
I know you can see us.
And ask questions. That's perfectly fine. But then if we need to make permit changes to the permit, I've worked on permits where I've drastically lowered the numbers because somebody said, "Hey, look at this. You missed this one." Yes, we did. This is great. Thank you. And we lowered the numbers. So those things happen, and that's why we do that.
I have a question. Okay, you said it's not going to go before the full board.
Oh, no, before the full board. There'll just be one board member at the hearing.
They don't hear you. They're just going to make a decision.
All right,
Yes.
then it will go before the full board.
That's
not
correct.
actually true. So on September 11th, this is DEQ's hearing. Okay, this isn't, technically it's required by the regulation. It has nothing to do with the board voting. All right, we tried to get that clear on the website. I've still gotten questions about it. We made some changes to the website to see if we could get that a little bit clearer for people. The board doesn't vote on September 11th. We are accepting comments.
But the chairman of the air board will be the presider.
Yeah, he'll be there.
And there may or may not be other board
Then what
members
happens
in attendance.
is we do that response, and I kind of cut off in the middle, so I
Then at a
apologize.
later date.
At a later date, there's a board meeting, and I don't know all the minutia of it, but there's an opportunity for people who commented to summarize their comments in front of the board. Bless you. summarize.
And we know that will be allowed. If you put in a prior
Yes,
one, they
yes,
will
that's-
absolutely, on
Which was the
that
same
date,
for the
allow
water.
people.
I don't
to
know
speak.
all of the details, but yeah,
That's my
I don't-
understanding, Mary.
Yeah,
yes.
but it's not to present
Somebody
new
who's trying to tell us
information. Go
maybe.
ahead.
Something.
Oh,
When we do the comments memo, that becomes part of the board package that's distributed to the public. And when the staff makes a presentation to the air board with regard to their voting up or down on the permit, they will go through the comments and they will basically provide a summary of the comments and a summary of the staff response. And they'll do that as part of the staff presentation. They're going to take questions from the board members. Having a member of the air board at the hearing provides a level of, it's a redundant level, so he can sit there and he's going to get the presentation along with everybody else. And he will typically say to the other board members, yep, the comments, that we received were along this line. So you have somebody there who is able to moderate or confirm or perhaps draw out from staff a little bit more detail about what happened in the hearing. And at that point, people who participated in the hearing process are able to come before the board and they can address the staff's response to comments. They can't introduce new information, but if they believe that their comment was inaccurately represented, or if they're not satisfied with the response, they have an opportunity to bring that to the board's attention, and the board will consider that prior to voting.
And the board can change the permit too. It's not necessarily just up or down. It can write new conditions.
But in case you are, seems to be happy with the air quality, it feels to me like the permit is probably going to be given. I don't want to but, so what I'm asking is, what are the type of comments or information that citizens can give to you which could make you look into more or change your opinion?
Modeling questions perhaps.
Modeling.
I mean, a lot of it is very complex. I heard one comment here that might be, like, you might well consider that had to do with notice before.
Yeah, Marie's comment about.
Yeah, Marie's comment about
being
notice. That's something we hadn't thought of.
So that she can
I mean,
plan.
that's the type of thing. That might be something that's very relevant in our air permit. I mean, that's the type of, things we hadn't thought of. And there's a lot of things we haven't thought of. A lot of things we have thought of.
But typically they will just delay the questions. I'm just asking, because we are so concerned about the health, which is not the same level of concern, I understand, by any of the other agencies. What can we do to bring either that more, that doesn't seem to work, to bring that more to the attention, health issues?
Well,
So what is
certainly we want to see health issues, although me and Pat, we think this is a very protective permit. We think this is the most protective permit among all compressor station permits in the country. That's why we think there's a substantial difference between the emissions the community would be exposed to here and those that communities around the Pennsylvania ones where those other studies have been. That's why we think this is more, we think it's a much more, protective permit. I know, like Mary and Lakshmi and others have raised issues about the quality of the air, the quality of the standards that we meet. We can certainly take comments on it, but we don't set our air quality standards. One thing, for instance, there might be issues on compliance. There might be issues on monitoring. Maybe we didn't do the monitoring requirements as protectively for the community as we could have. There might be some monitoring issues that we could look into. We might want to require, did we need to do more? I don't know. I mean,
No, keep going, keep going. You're hitting all the I was just going to add one
I'm trying to hit on the points that are relevant. Monitoring, compliance to the answers for that, but maybe there's something that, hey, we don't always catch everything. I mean, those are the types of things, Swami, that sort of strike me.
I have a simplistic question, because I'm a simpleton when it comes to this stuff. Okay.
I'm with you, Reverend.
Because first of all, I don't trust the million. Okay? I trust you guys more than I trust the million.
I appreciate that.
Because I felt like I've gotten truthful informed answers from you folks. I really did.
But we want to be straight shooting
Right.
with you, right?
Yeah, we
This is very important to us
Right.
too, and we, you
So-
know, we're doing what we can.
So, I mean, you have a reputation that you have to maintain.
Yes.
But you don't have a financial interest in this unless you have stock in the million. I don't know.
Which I don't.
Which
Which I don't think
Okay.
any of us in the
Right.
room do.
So many of us do not trust Dominion because we have found them not to be so truthful. Okay. And that's the argument with they.
No, I'm not gonna
bodacious statements,
say anything.
but
We're
that's
not
what
gonna
we-
argue with you.
That's
I'm not gonna argue with you.
Okay, so that's what we discovered.
Yeah.
So there is, one of the big problems, there is not another independent process to confirm. Right.
I'll let him finish.
Who's watching? You understand?
Yeah, no, I understand exactly, and that's actually goes to, you know, a key aspect of the permit is the compliance demonstration, what Mike was talking about, making it enforceable, so an inspector can show up and say, this is what you had to do you have the records to show that you did it? That's one thing. The emission rates is kind of what I think you're probably getting at, you know, they tell us, we emit nothing, and we don't have a check.
What about
We require
what about
tests.
at the house?
Actual
What
third-party
about,
tests that we
you know,
do.
some of the houses, let's say, let's pick a number, let's say within a mile radius, some independent regulation processes of surveillance, of confirmation situations.
Monitoring.
Oh, yeah, that's the right word,
there
monitoring
might be-
situations, that's the word I was looking for.
That's, I mean,
Thank you.
that's a legitimate.
Sometimes a preacher has to ask a question. I'm thinking like a preacher.
So how can we get that best
Right.
monitoring? Because we haven't heard anything about that.
Right.
Yeah,
that's
we
what I
are
was
in
gonna
fact doing our own baseline monitoring right now.
We
we've
discussed
done-
it in the.
We've done
Okay.
spectras, we're doing summa canisters, I don't know what you
Right.
told them. I have a couple questions that I've been trying to ask.
Yes.
Hold on, I'm gonna let
No,
you ask
don't
a
cut her
question.
off.
I just
She's
want-
been trying
right,
so
but
hard
see,
to
what happens is, what Dominion does, anything else that comes, if it doesn't come from their so-called experts, then they diminish it. Or they say it's this, to make it like it's not credible.
We get that all the time
Right.
about our
Okay.
own work.
Yeah, well, I mean, what we do is, you know, they have third-party firms that come in and do these things called stack tests. They're in the permit, they're required by the permit to ongoing basis. They have to submit a protocol is what we call it. It's basically a pre-approved plan. They submit it to us, we review it, we make sure they're gonna follow the steps, and then they schedule it so that we can go out there, you know, watch the test, then they submit all the results, and we get all the data, and, you know, so that's like the third party on the site stack testing protocol, approach, procedure, whatever word you want to use there. If you're talking about ambient monitoring, there are all kinds. I'm not a monitoring guy. We have a whole group of people who do monitoring across the state, and there are rigorous requirements, and I don't know them, honestly, so I can't really
Has that
speak to like
changed? 'Cause now
ambient
there's
monitoring.
Measurement, Cornell University, I believe, came out with a study saying measurements methane's been under-measured for.
Oh,
Right.
that's
And we just don't even have monitors, so.
I'm thinking
Is there new
of things we have a
measurements?
standard for, and that we, you know, the National Ambient Air Quality Standard, and that's what I'm talking
There's
about.
just
instead
so
of-
few
sorry.
actual air testing sites across the state that it just feels like that isn't working. But
Yeah, I
poor
think we
Charlie's
have
been
a-
trying to speak
Yeah,
forever.
Well, mine's about process. Again, I guess you're the public process person back here.
No, I've just been through a number of these. So I know the drill.
You can ask any of us, though.
Okay, yeah. So the fact that the hearing is the last day is really troubling for me because there may be people there who are suddenly like, oh, yeah, and I would like to make a comment, but they haven't been able to make a comment up to that point, you know, because they don't have the information. They're not hearing this.
There haven't been public. We're glad you're doing tonight.
Yeah.
We don't know how many
That's-
people are
Yeah.
going. There have not been meetings.
Yeah, so-
The community is not accustomed to coming to those.
Yeah, so.
They've been
Well,
discouraged.
You know, there's a lack of.
I hear you. I
Yeah.
understand. The process is sort of set in stone, meaning by our own procedures. What I would recommend highly is for you folks in the room to get the word out to folks, to comment, get the word out to, oh, believe me, some guy from the Sierra Club called me this afternoon. Sierra Club's gonna be here. probably in force today, a guy named Billy Davies.
Yeah, we know.
I've never met
And
him.
Gustavo and Kate.
He sounded very gung-ho.
Chad, I don't want to lose the thread.
Yeah.
For those people, anybody you talk to, make sure that they bring written comments to the hearing.
Yes.
Because with the number of people and the time restrictions, you know, we're going to try and get as many people up as possible, but you don't want to be, you know, the 407th person and then not have a piece of paper. And I mean, so make sure you tell people to bring something in writing. Plus, you only have a certain amount of time, so you want to summarize and submit them in writing anyways.
And you're
but-
doing a comment parties to
But
get
what we're
people
saying is
started.
that some people, by coming and listening,
That's what my
may,
point is.
may learn.
It's
And
an
they
evening.
don't,
It's
they
passive.
just,
my
they
point.
weren't
Yes.
concerned, but they
Yes.
decided they'd come to listen. And that's when they realized, oh my gosh.
But they can't comment again after that.
Well, they can comment, they can
Until-
comment up through the period. One of the, I think Mike and
Pat.
the other folk, Pat, have, I'm sorry.
That's okay, Kyle.
They've discussed, we've been through a number of controversial projects where you've had the hearing, you've had the